Hello, I am Stacey Gordon, and I am so excited to be presenting for Wonder Women Tech today. So I am looking forward to this conversation because even though it will be a little brief, I'm hoping that it will be impactful. When we think about how we build a culture of inclusion, which is what today's presentation is about, I think it's important to just think about the fact that there needs to be a blueprint, right? And so that's really what comes to mind is how do we ensure that we have a blueprint that we can provide? So I'm going to get started with, I guess, an introduction, right? That would be helpful. Hi, I'm Stacey Gordon, and some of you might have already read my book, watched one of my courses on LinkedIn Learning Platform, or participated in a company workshop. You may have heard me at Wonder Women Tech in the past, but it's quite possible that you don't know me from Adam. So I am a global talent advisor, workplace culture consultant, keynote speaker, and author, basically a facilitator of learning and a bias disruptor. And so I started Rework Work over a decade ago because I wanted to be able to positively impact how employers interact with employees. And I really want leaders to lead and employees to belong. So I hope that you're joining this session today because you agree with that sentiment and that you're looking for strategies to help you build a culture of inclusion. I have been lucky to be invited to provide strategic sessions and education to Fortune 100 companies like AT&T, GE, HP, tech companies like Facebook and Adobe, and universities, including my alma mater, Pepperdine, Northwestern, and Harvard. So I have had some of my expertise featured in Forbes, Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, and I have worked with LinkedIn, as I said in the beginning, to bring educational content to their LinkedIn learning platform. And so many of you may have seen my courses there. So with more than 1 million unique learners, I am hoping that today I'm going to inspire a few more of you to build a true culture of inclusion in your workplace. With that being said, I'm starting with the book, not as a sales pitch, but because that's where the information comes from, right? So we're talking about a blueprint. It is the unbiased blueprint. My book is called Unbiased, Addressing Unconscious Bias at Work. And in it, I detail the 4 areas, what I like to call the 4 A's. And so the idea for writing this book was to be able to dismantle unhealthy workplaces. And what I have found is that people like it, right? So I introduced the 4 A's, which is awareness, alignment, action, and advocacy in this book. And the reason for that was that I wanted to be able to give people something that was actionable, something that they could put into practice right away. And that's really the way that I operate. If you know me at all, you know that that is how I like to ensure that we're moving forward, that people have tools, resources, what they need. So along those lines, when we think about the unbiased blueprint, yes, it's called a blueprint, right? You could call it a framework, you could call it a schema. I mean, the UK, they like to talk about schemes, which sounds, sometimes you go, a scheme. But it's in a positive way, right? It's a completely different way of speaking. So when we think about awareness, it is the starting point for any organization's DEI journey. We need to make sure that we are starting with what does bias look like, right? Are we aware of the fact that there's a problem that we need to fix? Then we need to think about alignment, right? How are we going to get people together to align, get accountability for determining that direction and then supporting it, agreeing to do it, right? Because if we don't agree to do it, we can talk about it all day long. But if there's no actual agreement, there's no collaboration, then nothing's going to get done. And then the question is, what are you doing? So that's the action, right? We have to then think about how are we going to get to becoming diverse and inclusive. We want to create this culture of inclusion. What does that process look like? And what actions can we put into place? And there are so many different things we can do. So when we think about current awareness and alignment, right, you've got to bring that together and apply it to the action. So then what is advocacy? Well, you want to be able to sustain what you're doing. that is the ultimate destination, but it's not a stopping point. It's almost cyclical, right? It's going to take you through and around into a new way of doing things. And then you have to continuously be aware, making sure that it's working, right? So you want sustainability. That's your starting point, is what advocacy really is. So how do we make sure that we are maintaining intention and that we are embedding this into the DNA of the workplace? And so that is what I outlined in my book. Now, this is purposely small. I'm not expecting you to read all of this, but the reason I bring this up is because this is another framework. And it is a larger framework. In it, you will see awareness, alignment, action, advocacy. But then I broadened that out, right? And I spent a lot of time thinking about the concepts. What is it that we need to do to really make sure that we are going to be able to be successful and efficient in the workplace, and that we're actually going to be able to put these concepts into place. And so what I found was, this is complicated, right? And people look at this and their eyes glaze over and they're like, oh, there's no way, I can't do all of this. This is all, it's too much. So what I then did is, in this framework, broke it down again, and you'll see that there's 3 other words in here. DEI, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, but we like to look at it as disruption, evolution, and innovation. And so that is actually the underpinning for a lot of the things that we do, is like, how can we disrupt the thinking that people have, that status quo? How do we change that, right? How do we then evolve our behaviors? How can we make sure that we are changing things up? And then how can we innovate those systems and ensure that those systems are going to be able to be sustainable? Sound familiar? Yes, this is why all of these things, they do all come together. And so frameworks, I think, are important as a base, as a foundation, but they're not necessarily going to be the only thing that you have to follow, right? They're going to be there to help you move forward. So you've got to look at your data points, you've got to work through all of these things, and you've got to use it as a guide for your plan. That's the goal. So then you're like, oh my God, is this another framework? You would be right. The thing about this is that unconscious inclusion, many of you actually might have participated in our unconscious inclusion program. This actually doesn't even show up in that more complicated framework. Why? Because this is the only linear framework that we actually have in our arsenal. And the reason for that is that we are needing to move through there is a process that we have to take. And even though this is linear, it is still complex. Why? Because you can be in stage 1 in one area of your life and in stage 3 in a completely different area. And so this is why what you actually need to do is create your own frameworks. I'm not showing you all of these so I can say, get out your pen and paper and copy down every single framework and follow it to a T. I'm showing it to you so that you can see that I have a number of frameworks that I work out of, and you will too. And my framework might not be your framework, but the point is, you're smart, you're capable, you're in your role for a reason, and you can do this. You don't need my framework per se. You just need to know that you need to create a framework, right? So this one that I use is, how do we get to this place of unconscious inclusion? How do we create that inclusive workplace culture? What does that look like? And in order to do that, you first have to start with understanding that we all have bias. There's unconscious bias. That's awareness, right? This is just another variation of the awareness, alignment, action, advocacy. But in specifically as it relates to bias on its own, right? That's what I'm saying. There are so many pieces within diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility. This is specifically around bias, right? So we were looking at the fact that we have to understand we have it. We've got to understand that unconscious bias exists. We then have to get conscious of it. We have to become aware of those biases that we hold. And then we have to think about how we interrupt them. And then we have to get conscious of how we include people, right? That's the action. How can we become more conscious of that? Seeking ways to include people rather than excluding. How do we identify opportunities for action? And then we get to unconscious inclusion, which is reaching a stage where inclusion is automatic without having to work so hard, right? It's the default action. The thing is, as I said, you can be in conscious inclusion in one area and be thinking about unconscious bias in a different area. So we're always working through these, which is what makes it really complex. The thing is, the simple thing I want you to take away from all of this is, how do we get there? Is with practice. We have to practice. You cannot simply wake up one day and go, I hear you, Stacey. I got it now. I'm going to be more inclusive. That's great. I want the awareness, right? I want the alignment. I want you to be thinking and getting in creating some accountability around the fact that you're going to be more inclusive, but then you actually have to do it. And that's the hard part, because we have to practice, because we're going to make mistakes. I've talked a lot about how this is like riding a bicycle, that we have been trying to teach people how to ride a bicycle by giving them a book. You don't ride a bicycle by reading a book about it. You actually have to get on the bike and ride. And the same is true for this type of work. Reading a book is great for understanding the fundamentals. Having a framework and a blueprint is great for understanding the fundamentals and the foundation. But then you're going to have to get on that bike and ride. You're going to have to put your money where your mouth is, and you're really going to have to do the work. So we have to get there with practice. And you cannot simply wake up one day and say, yes, I've got it now. So as we've progressed in this work, and as we've dug deeper, we realize, right, the frameworks are going to mold and change depending upon the context, depending upon what it is that you are attempting to accomplish. And in order to find out what you're trying to accomplish, you need data. Data is what's going to do this for you. So it is why the humanity practice makes a lot of sense to me. Now, what is the humanity practice? This takes all of my frameworks as well as my process for getting to unconscious inclusion and puts it into one place. So unconscious inclusion is a process which has already been formulated, utilized by hundreds of people. It's been vetted and approved for recertification credits, right? So we've taken all that content and now we've moved it. And what I love about the humanity practice is it provides you with a tracking tool, a dashboard, a place for you to check your data. And why is that important? Because to get to that culture of inclusion, you need the data, right? You don't need my frameworks necessarily, but you need your own framework, and your own framework has to be grounded in values. If you read my book, you'll see that I talk about Ben and Jerry's, right, as one case example. And if you've been paying even a little bit of attention lately, you will know that Ben and Jerry, the co-founders of the company, are fighting to live their values right now. Why? Because we're looking at values alignment, which is lacking in a lot of leadership. Ben and Jerry have been fighting for that. So do you have a framework? Do you have something that you are fighting for? Do you have something that you can fall back on when your values are being challenged? You need support. You need an unbiased system that isn't going to coddle you or make excuses for you, but it also isn't going to shame you or judge you when you're attempting to do better. Because we all have to work at this. This isn't something that just happens immediately. So data matters. You cannot act without data. The first A in my framework is awareness for a reason. Data gives you awareness, right? It helps you understand that there's a problem. It helps you understand how big that problem is, who it's affecting, who's involved, what patterns exist. And without data, you're just guessing. You're just making assumptions and you're exacerbating bias, right? So what we've created is the HPI, which looks at measurable impact. It's actually a culture survey. You cannot improve what you can't see, and most engagement data misses what really drives humanity at work. So the HPI goes deeper, capturing how people actually experience trust, communication, and belonging every single day. So that's a really great tool. Of course, you've got lots of other tools that you can use. You know, this one does translate daily behaviors into measurable outcomes across trust, communication, and inclusion, and psychological safety, right, which is big, and gives you a clear roadmap for action, right? So we want a measurement that is going to see people and not just their performance. Now, we actually have a platform as well that takes that data and helps you with a dashboard that is going to show the daily practices and progress. And of course, if you want to act on that data, it's going to help you see those daily behaviors of people as they're going through the program. It also has a practitioner dashboard, and that's great because, you know, you can see culture improvement, participation, and insights and all of that. But truly, this is not a sales pitch. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to show you one tool, right? And just remember that I know you want to change, right? We all want to, or you wouldn't be here. But you want training, you want frameworks, and you want your strategies to look like this. You want linear, you want easy, you want a quick fix, and you want something that can show investors and stakeholders that says, look, we're doing something, right? That's what you want. And I get that, right? The problem is that you're dealing with a reality that looks like this. You've been pulled in so many different directions. There are so many different paths that you could take, and the loudest voices are attempting to dictate what you do, and that might not be the right way to go. So there are usually multiple right ways to go. The question is, where do we start? And what to do with the people who are against that starting point? What do we do with the people who don't have enough information? What do we do with the leaders that have not seen the data? So we want to create a culture of inclusion with your own blueprint. Because as I said earlier, and I think I need to be more clear when I say this and more direct about it, right? You have to create your own framework, but you have to start with data. So you already have a lot of data in your organization. You have exit interviews, you have culture surveys, you have a lot of this data at your fingerprints. You have employee relations data. You have reports that maybe have been ignored, right? You've got complaints. You've got it there. So question is, what have you done with that data? You have what you need to create a culture of inclusion. You also have the desire because you wouldn't be here, right? So you've got the data, you've got the desire. What's missing is a way to tie it all together. Your organization probably has the awareness and to some extent the alignment, but the actions have been unclear in many instances. And so if you're being pulled in a lot of different directions, what happens is sometimes those actions are in direct conflict. They show up as performative, they show up as check the box exercises, and they're not giving you what you actually want. And what actually happens is then those actions can then actually work against you because people see what you're doing, even though you're trying to do a good thing, you have good intentions, but you do not have good impact. So if you don't want your organization to come across as performative, the Humanity Practice Index is as close as we can get you to a linear path. Because what we're doing is actually providing you with a pathway to follow. Do this, do this, do this, and this will happen. And so, as I've shown you today, though, we've tried a lot of ways to do this. You've tried a lot of ways to do this. And so maybe it's time we try together. I would love to see what that would look like. I would love to see what you're doing in your organizations. And so if you are working on a process that is working, please reach out to me because I would love to know. I'd love to feature you maybe as a case study because people out here are struggling. They want answers. They need help. And I think you are too, or you wouldn't be in today's session. So I do like to always just put a little blurb in there about someone who has said I've done great things. This one was actually from the Senior Vice President of People at the Obama Foundation at the time. And I'm really ecstatic that I got to work with them. Interestingly, the rest of Clarissa's quote said, Maya Angelou taught us that we have to do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And she said, you taught us how to both know and do better. So many of you already know better. It's the do better part that you're struggling with. And that's what we are focusing on. So we can do better. We will do better. And you can build that culture of inclusion, but it's going to take a little work. I will leave you with one of my favorite quotes, which is, what you are doing speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. And my question for you is, what is your behavior saying?